yes, as we have already said, the Republicans have something they call a health plan. They think this is replace that part of their repeal and replace attitude toward Obamacare. Here to talk about that with us now is David Dayen. Dave's work from The Nation, The Intercept, and elsewhere. And his book, Chain of Title, is in bookstores now. Dave, first of all, thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, sure. Good to talk to you.
Yeah, always. And so you wrote for The Nation about this health care bill. I wrote about it too. I didn't even know what to call it. It's not really, it's kind of related to health in some tangential ways, but, I struggled. I think I called it a wealth grab, but I don't think I nailed it with that either. I mean, what is it? Is this just a sort of kludgy attempt to get out of the hole they dug themselves in by voting to repeal Obamacare so many times?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's two things. Number one, you've targeted the fact that for 7 years, the Republicans have demanded a repeal of Obamacare. And, in the George W. Bush administration, they didn't have to worry about replacing the thing that didn't exist yet. But because Obamacare really sort of created this expectation of a federal role in the healthcare system, they had to come up with some sort of replacement, which they really didn't want to do. I mean, their idea of a replacement is no Obamacare, I think. So the wonkery put towards replacement was far diminished from the expectation of repeal, and so you had that, number one, and number two, the real thing that the Republicans wanted to do was to get rid of the taxes that pay for Obamacare. I mean, this is the real directive here. You're talking about $600 billion in taxes, the vast majority of them going to the top 1%, the top 0.1%. The top 400 families, actually, in America will see a $7 million tax cut on average by getting rid of the Obamacare taxes. And the other taxes fall largely on health insurance companies, prescription drug companies, medical device companies, things like that. So when you put those two things together, you have a directive to cut taxes and a Republican Party thoroughly disinterested in the nitty-gritty of actually coming up with a workable healthcare system, because it's not really their interest. They don't think the government should be involved in healthcare. And so when you put those two together, you get this horrible mess that is kind of Obamacare but worse.
So then let me ask you this, Dave. I agree with that assessment completely. The most substantial thing about this bill is the tax breaks that it reinstates for a lot of people. And I would throw in, by the way, that it also provides a break for employers. So that will make life easier for people who invest in and own companies. So that, I would argue, too, is another break for the wealthy. And I guess what they did, they wanted to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, but this is a way just to cover their tracks. Is this really more or less a dissolution of the Affordable Care Act that they're just trying to cover over with a few leaves or something? I mean, will there be anything left 10 years from now if these bills pass?
Well, I mean, the problem is that this bill really has something for no one. I mean, if you liked Obamacare, this obviously degrades coverage. It could lead to an implosion of the individual health insurance market. It gives stingier tax credits. It will lead to less people covered. It will likely create worsening standards for insurance. So at every level, this is going to be, a step downward. If you didn't like Obamacare from the right, if you thought that this whole structure was damaged, this retains that structure. I mean, it's giving tax credits to individuals to purchase insurance on the individual market if they don't get it through their employer. It's the same. And and then there's the expansion of Medicaid being phased out over a 4-year period. That could be as much as a 9-year period because they phase it out by individual rather than all at once. There's the expectation that maybe that never phases out. There's kind of a problem on both sides here. And of course, Republicans are torn between their really hardline conservative base that wants the entire thing repealed and their more moderate base, particularly in those Republicans in states that did expand Medicaid that don't want to see millions of their constituents thrown off of health care. And it's hard to find a majority in either chamber of Congress that is workable to meet the needs of both of those constituencies. So the problem is, going back to the beginning, they promised that they were going to repeal and replace Obamacare, and they realize now that that is a hard thing to do.
And it's a hard thing to do because a lot of their constituents are going to be unhappy. Arguably, some of the insurance companies will be unhappy. I guess the one thing that surprised me the most about this, let's talk about the politics for a second, David Dayen. I guess one of the things that surprised me the most about this bill was the extent to which congressional Republicans seemed to blink. They voted against the Affordable Care Act, 60 times? And, okay, here's your shot. You got both houses of Congress. Go for it. And yet this seems to me to be an almost timid retreat. I mean, it's horrible, but in certain ways, politically, it seems timid. Was that because they don't want to upset their constituents? Was that because Trump promised that every American would have health insurance? We know he was lying, but was it the White House? Do you have any sense of that?
I just think that there was this. They kind of wrote some checks that they couldn't cash. I mean, ideologically, they're kind of opposed to this entire concept of, a federal role in making health insurance coverage affordable. And yet, despite that ideological resistance, they were kind of forced into trying to get that done. And therein lies the entire problem.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I want to go to another part of the bill too that I thought was interesting. And here's what you wrote about it. I thought it was a good summary. Your sentence is the continuous coverage provision, and now that's the provision that says if you have an interruption in your health insurance and you want to go back on health insurance, then you have to pay 30% more than you would have paid otherwise for a year. You said the continuous coverage provision offers a perverse incentive to the young and healthy to sign up for coverage only when they get sick. So why is that?
Well, because you don't incur the penalty unless you try to purchase coverage again. Mm-hmm. And so the people who feel like they're going to be healthy in their daily lives are not going to sign up if they didn't get, if they were blocked from coverage for a certain amount of time. They're not going to have to go back until they get sick, because this bill, because of the way it's being done, retains this concept of you cannot be denied coverage for a pre-existing condition. So you can get coverage whenever you want, and you only get penalized for not having coverage when you try to get it. So if you just do the math, if you're a healthy person, you're not going to get coverage unless you're sick. And what that means is the risk pool of those insured is going to be far sicker, and that makes it very difficult for insurance companies to really survive. And what this is commonly known as a death spiral. Right.
And now I was one who felt that even, first of all, I hated the individual mandate, since I'm an old lefty who thinks that, you should fund these things through progressive taxation in the end. But to me, this, I understood why it was done, actuarially and so on, but to me, this is even worse because as I predicted and as we saw, and I think you probably predicted it too, even the tax penalty for not getting insurance under the Affordable Care Act wasn't enough to prevent the kind of adverse selection you're talking about. This is going to be, I think, that much worse. And by the way, also, the money doesn't go to the government to fund healthcare initiatives. It goes to the insurance companies themselves. But as you say, it probably won't be enough to make up for the risk. So
that's the extreme irony of this whole thing, that if you pay a penalty to the government, it's tyranny, but if you pay a penalty to a private health insurance corporation, it's liberty. I don't understand how that works, but you're absolutely right. This is kind of the worst of all possible worlds. I mean, single payer is a mandate, right? Single payer says that everybody is going to be covered, and we solve the problem of who pays by having everybody pay through progressive taxation. This thing is there's no mandate unless you get sick, which just guarantees a sicker group of people who are insured, which guarantees rising prices because there's no cap on prices necessarily. There's this sort of age band between the old and the new, which actually grows under the Republican plan. AARP is calling it an age tax. But, and the 30% penalty, of course, what's bigger than 30% of $100? 30% of $200. Right. So even that is an incentive towards rising the price because the penalty will be higher as you increase the price.
Right.
So by every measure, this is going to mean higher premiums, higher deductibles, higher copays, and a sicker population within that insurance market of the individual market, which is going to make it hard for that market to survive.
Well, do we have any sense, David Dayen, if this bill is even going to pass, if people are even going to have to live with its consequences? As you said, the Republican Party seems hopelessly divided, or if not hopelessly, I don't want to put words in your mouth, it seems terribly divided on this issue. Does it have a chance of getting through the Senate?
Well, that's sort of the key question. And the wild card really is Donald Trump. Is Donald Trump going to stake his reputation and his political capital on getting this passed? And early signs were that he might, because so much of the rest of his agenda depends on getting this done and out of the way. He talked, he tweeted positively about it, held meetings with members of Congress. He vowed to go into Kentucky to have a rally that would sort of try to push and intimidate Rand Paul, who's one of the conservative dissidents on this particular package. Now we learned that actually it's going to be Mike Pence who's going to Louisville, Kentucky, not Trump. So maybe in the last day or so, he's backing away. You have practically every major conservative group opposed to this bill, in addition to the American Medical Association, American Hospital Association, AARP, and what have you. It's going to take a lot for Trump to bully or intimidate or cajole or persuade the necessary votes among Republicans to get them on board with passing this thing, which they can do through this budget reconciliation process without any Democratic votes. I just think it's going to be a very heavy lift, and we'll have to see.
Well, of course, we'll all be watching. And my closing thought, Trump not only touted this bill before it came out, I believe he said it was going to be beautiful. And I think they say beauty is simplicity. I'm not sure they made it. But David,
it's also in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, this beholder isn't impressed. But listen, David Dayen, as always, great to talk to you. Thanks for writing about this, and thanks for coming on the show.
All right. Thanks for having me.